In 1982, Atari was the fastest growing company in American history. $2 billion in annual revenue, 90% market share in home video games. The name had become a synonym for the medium itself. That was 1982. By 1984, the home division was sold for zero cash, and truckloads of unsold merchandise were being crushed and buried in a New Mexico landfill. The collapse did not just end a corporation, it erased an entire American industry for nearly a decade. Sunnyvale, California, 1972. Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney had just left their engineering jobs at Ampex, a tape and recording equipment company, and incorporated a new venture called Atari. The name came from the strategy game Go. The starting capital was $500. Bushnell had spent time working at an amusement park in Utah, which gave him an understanding of coin-operated entertainment that most electrical engineers simply did not have. He had already built Computer Space, the first coin-operated video game, but it proved too complicated for a general audience. The lesson was clear: simplicity sold. So Bushnell hired Alan Alcorn, another Ampex engineer, and assigned him a training exercise: build a simple table tennis game. Alcorn's design used affordable transistor logic rather than a costly microprocessor, and the result was Pong. The prototype was installed at Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale. Within days, the machine stopped working. The coin reservoir, a plastic milk carton, had been stuffed so full of quarters that it shorted out the mechanism. That malfunction was the birth certificate of a new industry. Pong spread across the country, but success attracted imitators. To fight back, Bushnell made a move that was equal parts clever and deceptive. He had his neighbor Joe Keenan set up a company called Key Games that appeared to be a competitor. In reality, Key Games was an Atari subsidiary designed to bypass exclusive distribution agreements by selling the same product through different channels. The gambit worked. By 1974, Key Games merged back into Atari, and the company controlled the arcade market. But Bushnell understood that the real money was not in arcades. It was in American living rooms. In 1974, engineer Harold Lee proposed a home version of Pong, developed under the codename Darlene. The finished unit contained the most complex consumer electronics chip of its time. Every major toy and electronics retailer rejected it. Then Atari reached the sporting goods department at Sears. A buyer named Tom Quinn offered an exclusive holiday deal. By Christmas 1975, Sears had moved roughly 150,000 units under its Telegames label. Video gaming had become a consumer electronics category. This success created a problem Atari could not solve alone. The market for single-game consoles was becoming crowded and commoditized. Atari's engineers were developing a programmable console codenamed Stella that would use interchangeable cartridges. The development costs were enormous. Atari needed outside capital. In late 1976, Warner Communications, the media conglomerate led by Steve Ross, acquired Atari for approximately $28 million. Bushnell personally received about $15 million, and he stayed on as chairman. Warner's money brought the resources to finish Stella, which launched in late 1977 as the Video Computer System, later renamed the Atari 2600. The console ran on a variant of MOS technology 6502 microprocessor, chosen specifically for its low cost. Its graphics chip generated images one line at a time, demanding extraordinary efficiency from programmers. Early sales were modest, around 250,000 to 400,000 units in the first year. Space Invaders arrived next. In 1980, Atari licensed the arcade sensation from Taito for the home console. It was the first piece of software so compelling that it sold hardware on its own merit. Sales of the Atari 2600 quadrupled. By 1982, Atari was generating $2 billion a year and employing thousands of people across the country. But Warner's corporate culture was grinding against the engineering ethos Bushnell had built. Emmanuel Girard, a Warner executive vice president, pushed for tighter financial controls and marketing discipline. Bushnell pushed back, arguing that the aging 2600 needed to be replaced with more advanced hardware. The disagreement came to a head during a budget meeting that reportedly ended in a shouting match. On December 28, 1978, the Warner board removed Bushnell as chairman. He departed to build Chuck E. Cheese. Ray Kasser, a textile executive from Burlington Industries, took over. Kasser ran Atari like a consumer goods company. Revenue soared, but the engineering culture collapsed. He reportedly dismissed programmers as interchangeable labor. In 1979, 4 of the company's best developers, David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead, walked out and founded Activision, the first independent video game publisher. Their motivation was straightforward. Atari refused to offer royalties or even credit their names on the games they had created. Activision proved you could build a profitable software company on someone else's hardware without manufacturing a single console. That departure permanently changed the economics of the entire industry. If Atari had stopped here, this would be a story about corporate mismanagement and a talent drain. What happened next turned it into an industrial catastrophe. In 1982, Atari licensed Pac-Man for the home console and produced 12 million cartridges. The problem was that only 10 million Atari 2600 consoles existed. The game itself was rushed and visually inferior to the arcade version. It sold over 7 million copies, making it the best-selling title on the system, but millions more were returned by retailers for credit. That same year, Warner's Steve Ross personally negotiated the rights to an E.T., the extraterrestrial game, for a reported $20 to $25 million. Programmer Howard Scott Warshaw was given 5.5 weeks to build it. The game was widely considered unplayable. Out of roughly 4 million units produced, as many as 3.5 million came back unsold. The financial damage was immediate and severe. On December 8, 1982, Warner announced reduced sales projections. The stock dropped 35% in a single session. $1.3 billion in market value evaporated. Kasser was later found to have sold personal shares of Warner stock 40 minutes before the public announcement. In 1983, Atari posted losses of $538.6 million. The entire home video game industry, which had peaked at $3.2 billion in 1982, collapsed to roughly $100 million by 1985, a 97% decline across the sector. Several forces converged to produce that collapse. The success of Activision had opened the floodgates. Dozens of new publishers, many with no engineering experience, began producing cheap software for the Atari 2600. Atari had no technical mechanism to prevent unlicensed cartridges from running on its hardware. The market was swamped with low-quality games that consumers eventually stopped buying altogether. At the same time, companies like Commodore were selling full home computers at prices that undercut dedicated game consoles. Parents who had spent money on Pac-Man and E.T. decided video games were a passing fad. Retailers pulled shelf space, and the industry went into freefall. In September 1983, truckloads of Atari merchandise from an El Paso warehouse were crushed and buried in a landfill near Alamogordo, New Mexico. For decades, people assumed the burial was millions of ET cartridges. A 2014 excavation revealed approximately 728,000 items, and only about 10% were ET copies. The rest were a cross-section of the entire Atari catalog, consoles and computers included. It was not a symbolic gesture. It was a tax write-off for a company liquidating a shuttered factory's inventory. By July 1984, Warner sold Atari's home division to Jack Tramiel, who had recently left Commodore. Warner received no cash. The deal consisted of $240 million in long-term promissory notes and stock warrants. Tramiel's philosophy was blunt. Business is war. He gutted the operation, shuttered 80 domestic branches, fired nearly every game developer, and pivoted to manufacturing the Atari ST computer line. The ST found a following among European musicians because of its built-in MIDI ports, but the American console market belonged to Nintendo now. Atari tried again with the Lynx handheld in 1989 and the Jaguar console in 1993. The Lynx sold roughly 3 million units against the Game Boy's 100 million. The Jaguar moved 125,000 units and ended Atari as a hardware manufacturer. In 1996, the company merged with a hard drive maker called JTS. In 1998, the Atari brand was purchased by Hasbro Interactive for $5 million. $500 to $2 billion to $5 million. That is the arc. The standard reading of this story is that Atari failed because of bad games and corporate greed. That reading is accurate, but incomplete. What collapsed alongside Atari was the idea that America could lead in consumer electronics hardware. Atari had no lockout chip, no licensing mechanism to prevent its own platform from being flooded with garbage. Nintendo learned that lesson and built a technical lock into the Nintendo Entertainment System. Sony learned it again with PlayStation. The companies that inherited Atari's market understood something Atari never did. You have to control the ecosystem, or the ecosystem consumes you. The deeper loss was cultural. Atari's early engineers were building the future in garages and rented offices in Sunnyvale. They were designing circuits, writing code, and manufacturing hardware on American soil. When that generation of talent scattered after the crash, much of it never came back to consumer electronics. The programmers who left Atari went into business software, defense contracts, and personal computing. America ceded hardware manufacturing to Japan, then South Korea, then China. The video game industry did recover. It is now worth more than film and music combined. But the consoles are designed in Tokyo and Redmond. The chips are fabricated in Taiwan. The assembly happens in Shenzhen. Atari did not just lose a market. It lost the argument that Americans could build the machines Americans wanted to use.